We're diving into a really concerning situation today. It's a stark example, actually, of what happens when large-scale engineering meets, well, fragile ecosystems.
That's right. We're looking at an urgent statement from a whole group of river ecology experts about a massive fish die-off in the Balkans.
And the source we're digging into is titled Analysis of the Possible Cause of Fish Docs.
Yeah, and what jumps out immediately is the sheer number of scientists involved. This isn't just one person's opinion. It's led by Professor Gabriel Singer from Innsbruck University, but dozens of researchers signed off.
They're basically calling out a major ecological disaster, one they say should have been foreseen.
Exactly. So our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack their explanation, what they think is the most likely scientific reason for this die-off.
And also look at the bigger picture, the sort of systemic issues they raise and what needs to happen right now, according to these experts.
It's kind of like an ecological post-mortem on a dam project that seems to have gone badly wrong.
Okay, let's set the scene. Talk us through the timeline. When did things go critical on the Neretva River?
Well, the paper focuses on September 12th, 2025. That's when the mass die-off was observed, specifically downstream of the Ulog Hydropower Plant, the HPP.
Which was newly operational then.
Yes, and that timing is absolutely key. The die-off happened right after the plant started its first major water releases in months.
Not just a trickle, but significant releases.
Right. The report mentions a series of 3 quite sudden flood waves. They were recorded downstream. So the moment they really started operating the turbines, disaster struck.
And the impact wasn't just numbers, it was the type of fish lost, wasn't it? These were sensitive species.
Heartbreakingly so. We're talking hundreds of dead fish and crayfish. And crucially, this included red-listed species, things like the soft-mouthed trout, Salmo obtuserostris.
A very unique fish for that region.
Absolutely. And also the white-clawed crayfish, Ostropodimobius palipes. These aren't just common fish. Losing them is a serious blow to the area's biodiversity. They're vital parts of that Dinaric karst ecosystem.
Now, one fascinating point the experts make is that this wasn't totally unexpected. There were apparently warning signs before September 2025.
Yes, they really emphasize that. There was a history here. Back during construction in September 2023, there were already reports of fish kills. Witnesses mentioned very murky, polluted water.
Okay.
But maybe the most striking warning sign came in October 2024. After they did the initial test filling of the reservoir behind the dam,
What happened then?
observers noted this really dramatic color change in the reservoir water. It went from the river's natural, beautiful emerald green to this kind of blackish, murky color.
Wow, like the water itself was signaling something was wrong.
Exactly. It was a huge red flag about the fundamental chemical shifts happening inside that newly created reservoir.
Which brings us to that transformation. The Ulog HPP didn't just manage water flow, it created a totally different environment, right?
Completely. It replaced a fast-flowing mountain river with a deep, still lake. We're talking up to 51 meters deep, holding about 6.5 million cubic meters of water.
And that depth changes everything, chemically speaking.
It really does. When you impound water that deep, especially where it gets warm, you get thermal stratification.
Like layers forming in the water.
Precisely. Think of a lake in summer, warm on top, cold down below. The issue is these layers don't mix well, so the bottom layer, the hypolynion, gets cut off from the oxygen supply at the surface.
Okay, so the bottom layer loses oxygen. But why would it happen so severely here?
Well, it's supercharged by everything the dam flooded.
Hmm.
About 123 hectares of land went underwater: soil, trees, plants, all that organic stuff.
So decomposition fuel?
Exactly. All that material starts to decay in the cold, dark, oxygen-starved bottom layer. And because there's no oxygen, it decays anaerobically.
Without oxygen, like a compost heap, but underwater and without air.
A giant toxic compost heap, basically. And this anaerobic decomposition produces some nasty byproducts.
Such as?
Greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide, but critically for the fish die-off, high levels of hydrogen sulfide.
HESS.
The rotten egg gas. That's the one. And it's incredibly toxic to aquatic life, even at quite low concentrations.
So how does the HPP operation fit in? Why did turning on the turbines trigger the release of this toxic brew?
It's down to standard hydropower design, often. The intakes that feed water to the turbines are usually placed deep in the reservoir where the water pressure is highest.
So they're pulling water right from that cold, oxygen-poor, H-rich bottom layer?
That's the mechanism. When Ulog HPP started generating power, it sucked up this toxic deep water and discharged it directly into the river downstream.
Effectively poisoning the river section right below the dam.
turning it, as you said, into a toxic drain pipe for that lethal hypolimnion water.
Okay, so the group of experts are very clear then. They state the cause was this release of oxygen-depleted, H2O-rich water.
Unequivocally, that's their conclusion.
But you mentioned they didn't have direct access to sensor data inside the dam. So how did they build such a strong scientific case?
They used a really clever combination of evidence they could gather: field observations, downstream data, and some basic chemistry principles. They lay out 4 key lines of reasoning.
All right, let's walk through them. What's the first piece of evidence?
Okay, first, timing and temperature. As we said, the die-off happened exactly when those large water releases started. That's a strong correlation.
And the temperature?
Measurements downstream during these releases showed the discharged water was significantly colder than the normal river water.
Ah, proving it came from the cold, deep layer.
Precisely. It confirms the source was that stratified, cold hypolimnion right when the fish started dying.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second line of evidence?
This is about the direct observations, the witness accounts. It paints a grim picture.
What did people actually see?
They saw dead fish, obviously, but also fish at the surface, visibly gasping for air, a classic sign they can't get enough oxygen from the water.
Desperate behavior.
And even more telling, crayfish were seen crawling out of the river onto the banks. Crayfish only do that if the water becomes utterly uninhabitable really quickly.
Wow. Fleeing the water itself.
Exactly. And then crucially, people reported that strong, pervasive smell of rotten eggs.
Hydrogen sulfide again.
The H2O signature. So you have the timing, the cold water, the gasping fish, the fleeing crayfish, and the smell. It all points strongly to severe oxygen depletion and H2O's poisoning.
That's compelling. What was the third point? Something about geography.
Yes, the location of the dead fish. They were found almost exclusively in the river section immediately downstream of the powerhouse where the water was released.
Not further down.
Not in the same numbers. Further downstream, cleaner tributaries like the Krupak Spring Stream and the Ujuda River flow in. Their water mixes, dilutes the toxins, and the river's natural flow starts to reoxygenate the water.
So the limited zone of death actually points back to the dam as the single source point.
Exactly. The pattern of impact confirms the dam discharge was the origin of the toxic slug of water.
Okay, 3 strong points. What's the fourth? You mentioned something visual earlier, the black water.
Ah, yes. This is maybe the most, well, chemically elegant piece of evidence.
Yeah.
Aerial photos taken after the discharge surge showed this distinct plume of blackened water moving downstream from the dam.
Black water? Why black?
It's chemistry in action. The experts believe it's caused by manganese oxides precipitating out of the water.
Okay, explain that a bit more. Manganese.
Right. So in that deep, oxygen-free bottom layer of the reservoir, the anoxic hypolimnion manganese exists in a dissolved, reduced state. And in that state, it's colorless, invisible.
Okay.
But the moment that deep anoxic water, loaded with this dissolved manganese, hits the normal, oxygen-rich river water downstream,
Chemistry changes.
instantly. The manganese reacts with the oxygen it oxidizes, and when it oxidizes, it forms tiny solid particles, precipitates, which are black, like a form of manganese rust.
So the river turning black was literally a chemical reaction showing anoxic water hitting oxygenated water.
Precisely. It's a visible marker, a chemical fingerprint, proving that the HPP was dumping that oxygen-free deep water into the healthy river environment. A very powerful piece of evidence.
Incredible. So the evidence seems really solid on the immediate cause. But the experts, they go further, right? They point to a failure much earlier in the process, in the planning stages.
Yes, this is a crucial part of their analysis. They directly criticize the environmental impact study, the EIS, that was done for the Ulog HPP before it was even built.
What was wrong with it?
They argue it fundamentally failed to properly assess the specific risk, the risk of thermal stratification, the resulting oxygen depletion in the deep water, and the potential for hydrogen sulfide buildup.
It just wasn't considered adequately?
Apparently not. The report states the EIS lacked the necessary predictive ecological modeling to foresee this kind of outcome.
Hold on. Are you saying that for a huge dam project on what's known to be an ecologically sensitive river, boosting endangered species, they didn't properly model a basic limnological process like stratification, something scientists have understood for, what, a century?
That seems to be the core of the systemic critique. The EIS, which is supposed to be the safeguard, appears to have missed or downplayed this fundamental risk. It treated the river maybe more like plumbing than a complex ecosystem being radically transformed.
And the stakes were incredibly high given the species there.
Absolutely. We mentioned the softmouth trout. The area also hosts the marble trout, Salmo marmoratus. Both are threatened. This wasn't just any river. It's a biodiversity hotspot.
And the experts believe this wasn't a one-off freak event. They think it could happen again.
Yes, they state this scenario is a realistic ecological risk that's highly likely to recur under future normal operating conditions, unless changes are made.
So if the EIS, the planning document, missed this fundamental HRO's risk, it really makes you question how well the long-term impacts on those trout populations were ever really understood or planned for.
It really does. It highlights a potential gap between the engineering plans and the complex ecological reality. It suggests the initial assessment might not have fully grasped the long-term consequences of turning that river section into a deep, potentially toxic reservoir.
Which leads us to the immediate actions. Given this disaster, what are the experts demanding now?
They call for two urgent steps. First, immediate investigation inside the reservoir. Operators need to measure the current temperature layers and test the water chemistry thoroughly. Oxygen, HUS, other related chemicals, organic matter, especially in that deep hypolemmian layer and in the water being released.
Basically, map out the extent of the toxic water they're currently holding back.
Exactly. Understand the scale of the problem right now. The second immediate action is about evidence gathering downstream.
The fish themselves.
Yes. Secure samples of the dead fish and crayfish for proper lab analysis, pathological assessment. They need to confirm hydrogen sulfide poisoning definitively.
To solidify the cause of death scientifically and legally.
Right. And looking beyond the immediate response, what about preventing this from happening again? Are there technical fixes?
There are. The experts point to established engineering solutions, though they aren't cheap. One key approach is using depth-selective water withdrawal systems, so intakes that can draw water from different depths.
Exactly. Instead of just having an intake fixed at the bottom, you have options. You can choose to draw water from a higher layer that still has sufficient oxygen, avoiding the toxic bottom water.
Choose the cleaner water layer, not the toxic one. Makes sense. Is there an alternative?
The other main technical fix is artificial oxygenation, basically pumping oxygen directly into the deep hypolemmian layer.
To prevent the HS from forming in the first place.
Correct. It tackles the root cause by stopping the anaerobic decomposition. These kinds of measures, the experts imply, should be considered essential for operating a dam like this on such a sensitive river.
And beyond the tech fixes, what about ongoing management? It sounds like more than just ticking boxes on a monitoring form is needed.
Definitely. They stress that future management has to be driven by proper science. That means predictive ecological modeling, running simulations of how the reservoir water will stratify, mix, and change chemically under different conditions.
Proactive modeling, not just reactive monitoring.
Yes, and that modeling needs to be constantly validated and updated with systematic monitoring, not just at the surface, but throughout the whole water column, top to bottom and downstream as well. Continuous vigilance.
So the core message is pretty stark. Hydropower is possible, but it demands a much higher level of ecological responsibility, especially in sensitive areas.
That's the bottom line. We can't afford these kinds of ecological catastrophes, especially when the science to predict and prevent them largely exists.
It really seems the ultimate takeaway here is how even sophisticated 21st century engineering can fail catastrophically if it ignores or perhaps fails to properly model some fairly basic, long-understood environmental chemistry.
That disconnect between the blueprint and the real dynamic ecological system is a huge challenge. And the cost, as we see here, is measured in lost biodiversity, in species that might not recover.
A sobering lesson indeed. It leaves you wondering how many other projects might have similar hidden risks baked into their original assessments.
That's the lingering question, isn't it? It forces a rethink about how we evaluate environmental impacts from the outset.
Well, this has been a really insightful, if troubling, deep dive. Thank you for walking us through this analysis.
Glad we could unpack it. It's important information.
And thank you, our listeners, for joining us for this deep dive.